Hi friends, welcome to my studio. Today we're going to be doing a beginner's lesson for drawing. To get started, you're just going to need some paper, and I'm using a bigger sheet of paper, but whatever paper you have in your house is fine. And you're also going to need a pencil with an eraser. You can use a mechanical pencil, whatever pencil you feel most comfortable with. You're going to see me drawing with a marker, but that's just because I want you to be able to see it, and I'm afraid the pencil might not show up on camera. So before we get started, there are two definitions that you need to know. The first one is shading, which is basically just drawing the shadows that you see. And the second one is going to be gradient, which is transitioning from one shade to another. You can also create a gradient between two colors and two textures, but since we're just working in black and white today, we're just going to focus on the gradient between shades. So before we get started, we're going to go over a few different ways that you can create shading. There are infinite ways to shade, but we're just going to cover 4 today. Alright, so this top apple that you see is drawn only using line. And a lot of people draw this way, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But since we're talking about shading and gradients today, I just want to show you some examples that I really enjoy doing. So over here you'll see me using stippling for my shading on my apple, and here you'll see stippling in a gradient. And stippling is just using a bunch of tiny dots to show where your shading is, and the closer the dots are together, the darker it's going to look, and the further apart they are, the lighter it's going to look. And I've done that here on my apple, where the light was hitting this part of the apple more than this side over here, and so the closer I put my dots closer together to show that shadow. Hatching is similar to stippling, except it's going to be lines instead of dots. So the closer together your lines are, the darker it's going to look, and the further apart they are, the lighter it's going to look. So I made this apple look a little bit darker, but it's very similar. You can see the same light area as from the stippling apple, there's no line there, and where the darker shadows are, I put lines closer together. Cross-hatching is similar to hatching, whereas it's lines, but instead of just one line all going in the same direction, you have multiple lines crossing over each other. And some artists will do just 2 lines going in different directions. Some of them have 3 or 4 directions. It's really up to you, whatever you like the most. For me, I usually don't try and confine myself doing cross-hatching to one particular direction, because it's super fun to try and just draw and go in all sorts of directions. And you can kind of see I've done that here in my shading of this apple. So I've got, in this area alone, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 directions of lines to show my shadows there. So there's really no limit, it's just up to you, and I really enjoy doing this method of shading myself. The last one we're going to talk about today is blending, and that's where you just smudge, basically. Smudge your pigment from your marker, from your paint, from your pencil, to kind of blend it in with the other shades that you have going on. And that's super easy with your pencil to just use your finger to blend it out, or you can use a paper towel or a Kleenex if you don't want to get your finger all smudgy and get all of that graphite on there. And so this is most commonly used for chiaroscuro, which is creating an object that looks more 3-dimensional and realistic. And you can see that here, this apple compared to the others looks most realistic because it doesn't have that outline. And again, there's nothing wrong with that outline, but if you're going for something that is more realistic, blending is the way to go for sure. Okay, so now that we've looked at different ways that we can shade, we're going to practice those by creating some gradients. Okay, so we're going to start with our stippling here, and we're just going to create a gradient. So it doesn't have to be a perfect rectangle or perfect square, just as long as we have that clear distinction and that gradual change between the dark shadow and the light shadows. So for stippling, again, it's those dots all together. So I'm going to try and do mine kind of in a rectangle, so I'm going to start here, and I'm not going to start with them too close together, just so I get an idea for what I'm dealing with. And again, it's going to look a lot different if you're using a pencil. Stippling is really difficult with pencils. It's a lot easier with markers. So if you really want to practice stippling and get into it, I recommend using marker or pen over pencil, just because it'll be a little easier. Alright, and I want it to extend a little more this way, so I'm going to add more dots here. And then I'm just going to go back in because I want this shadow to be really, really dark. So the more dots you have and the closer together they are, the darker it will be. And it does take a very, very long time. Stippling is probably the most time-consuming shading method as far as I know. But it can still be really fun, really therapeutic. And it's definitely an interesting looking way of shading. I really like stippling. All right. And then remember, since we want this to be a gradual transition, you don't want there to be any lines between your shadows. So you want it to be dark, dark, sort of dark, not very dark, all the way leaning. Oh, and I smudged my marker. If you're working with pencil, you won't have that problem. But if you're working with marker, be sure not to smudge your marker. All right, so I've got a pretty good dark shadow going over there. And now I just want to gradually add less and less. To create those medium shadows. All right, and I think that's pretty good for stippling. And if you want to do yours even darker or lighter on one end, that's perfectly fine. What we really want to be practicing right now is that transition in the middle. All right, and now we're going to move on to hatching. And again, just like stippling, the closer together your lines are going to be, the darker it's going to look, except instead of dots, it's going to be lines, all going in the same direction, remember. So I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to make my lines kind of close together, and then slowly they're going to get further apart. And since we're just practicing gradients, it doesn't have to be a perfect rectangle or anything, because we just want to practice getting that transition. So I'm just going to add more lines to make this area darker, and just a few because I don't want it to be too much of a clean break between the shadow and the highlights. So I need to spread them out a little bit. And I'm making this one maybe a little bit too long. That's fine. So you might practice with a gradient that's a little bit smaller than that, but that's the one that I did. And hatching is really quick, a lot quicker than stippling. Cross hatching, just like hatching, it's going to be with lines, except they're going to be crossing in different directions from one another. So I think I'm going to start it the same as my hatching. And then they're going to get further apart. Add some more close together. And then since it's cross hatching, remember you have to have lines going in multiple directions. So I'm just going to come this way. And I'm going to have some lines come shorter than others because I want it to look darker at this end than at this end. I'm going to extend some of them, but not others. And like I said, you can have more than two directions. So if you want to have more than two directions of lines, then you can, and I'm going to do that with mine, just to kind of make it a little bit longer and a little bit darker at this end too. All right, so the last method that we're going to be trying today is blending, and I'm going to be showing you my example with pencil for this one, just so you can get an idea of how to do this yourself. So for this one, I'm going to start by just coloring in a block where it's darker here, and gradually get lighter in how much pressure I'm putting on my pencil as I get further and further away. I want to make the dark area extend a little more. And now I'm going to take my finger, and again, I said it before, if you don't want to get your finger dirty, you can take a paper towel to smudge, but I don't mind getting a little dirty, so I'm just going to blend that out and drag the graphite along the page. And you can see the further away I'm getting from my darkest area, the less pigment that's dragging across, and you can see it's going to be lighter over there. But it did get a little light over here because I dragged all of the graphite away, so I'm going to darken it up a little bit again. and then blend it together with my finger again. And if you really want to get into blending and you really don't like getting your finger dirty and paper towel just doesn't work out for you, you can buy smudge sticks from most art supply stores, and they're basically pencils that are made of paper. That way you can blend easily without having to get dirty or waste all of your paper towels. And I'm going to darken this up again because I really like having super dark shadows in my drawings. Just blend it a little bit more because I don't want to see those lines in there from the pencil. I want to see that gradient. Alright, now that we've practiced our gradients, I want us to apply what we've learned to an actual drawing. So I don't recommend anything too complicated that has like a lot of shapes or textures to it, so I'm going to be drawing an apple today. It's nice and simple, it's a recognizable shape, and the way the light bounces off of it makes it perfect practice for all the stuff that we've gone over today. If you don't have an apple in your house but you'd like to draw one, feel free to just find a picture online or find something else that's kind of similar in your house that you can draw today. Alright, so I'm going to be doing my drawing using cross-hatching, since that's one of my favorite ways to draw is with cross-hatching. So I'm going to start with finding the darkest shadows on my apple. And so for me, from my angle, it's going to look a little bit different for you, but the darkest areas are right here, right over here, of course at the very, very bottom, and right in here in the little dimple there. So I'm going to start with the dimple, and I'm not going to do all of my hatching and cross-hatching just yet. I'm just going to get a general idea of what I've got going on in there. So let me see. I'm going to start with not going as dark as I can. I'm going to start with probably about a medium shadow, just so that I can start there and work my way to the darker, so that I don't have areas that aren't blending together in a gradient fashion like we want. And then I'm going to do something similar, and since it's cross-hatching again, the lines don't have to be in the same direction, so I'm not going to worry about having them go in the same direction over here. And then I'm going to work on my shadows on this side. And this is what I like about cross-hatching, is the lines are going in all different directions, and it's super fun, and it looks fun. Okay, and already you can kind of see that apple taking shape on my page. And now I'm going to start coming in with some of that cross-hatching, because right now I've just basically got hatching going on. And since right down here it's still really dark, just not quite as dark as it is here or here, I'm going to start in this area, because I want this part to look about as dark as these areas look, and to make those darker shadows appear, I'm going to start that cross-hatching now. Alright. And you don't have to just use cross-hatching. You can add a little bit of line work if you'd like to. I'm not going to add line work all the way around my piece, but I am going to definitely add it in the areas that are darkest. It's going to help it look a little bit darker, and I just honestly like the way that it looks. And feel free to work as slow or as fast as you want or need to. You don't have to work quickly, but if you'd like to, you absolutely can. But it's always nice to be careful with your drawing so that you know that every line is what you want. It's very intentional, and you're not going to feel like you constantly have to erase or start over. Alright. And now my apple doesn't really have much of a stem, but I'm going to draw one anyway because I think apples look nice with stems. So even though there's just a short little stem in there, I'm going to add a little bit more of one and add some hatching there. cross-hatching to darken that shadow that's in there. All right. And now I want to, now that I've gotten the areas that are darkest kind of drawn in, I want to look at the areas that have the most light bouncing off of them. So we've got some light here, here, and here. And there's a little bit of light bouncing back up off the table and hitting the apple here. So when I'm drawing in to darken the rest of my apple with the medium shadows, like right here and right here, I want to make sure not to cover those areas that have the brightest parts to them. So I'm going to go around that dimple. And you can use your line to show direction as well, and that's something else that I really like about cross-hatching, is that you can use the direction of your lines to kind of show which way the apple is curving. So you can kind of see I've already started doing that a little bit with my lines here, which kind of make your eye pull that back part down, and same on this side, so it kind of helps to round it out. So definitely think about the direction of your lines as well when you're drawing. And again, there's some highlights there, so I don't really want to get too many lines drawn in there. Some shadow back there. And now that I'm adding those medium shadows, I want to make sure to keep darkening my darkest shadows so that we can differentiate between those areas. So right here, I'm going to draw my lines further apart because there's a lot more light hitting those areas. But right here, there's more of a shadow, so I'm going to do those ones just slightly closer together. And I'm going to extend these lines a little bit. Right there. And I want to make this area a little bit darker. So I'm going to add some more lines. And this is what I like about cross-hatching, as opposed to hatching itself, because with hatching you have to feel like your lines are all going in the same direction, and it's hard when you decide you want to add more to an area. But with cross-hatching it doesn't matter, because you can just add them right on top in any direction. Super fun to just keep adding to it. Alright, and now I think I've got a pretty decent apple going here. So I'm going to start working on the shadow underneath, because you don't want your apple just floating in space. You want to make sure that it's grounded, that you can see that it's sitting on a surface. So I'm just going to kind of get an idea of my shadow. I have a really dark shadow going here, and then a bigger shadow going here. So I think I'm going to just draw the bigger shadow, because I think that's super fun. So I'm going to kind of sketch just a quick little outline so I know where I'm going. And then bring my shadow all the way up to the apple, so I know that it's coming from the apple. Alright, and then because it's super dark underneath the apple, this is what I like about cross-hatching. Add some more lines there. And I'm going to add even more because it's super dark right underneath there. That's the sound of my dog running around and barking. Sorry about that. Alright, still feel like something's missing. I'm going to add some more here. And you can work on this for as long as you want to. I could draw forever. You always want to look back, and there's always something, even after you decide it's done and you start showing people, there's always something you want to fix later. I think this apple is, well, I say it's pretty good and then I want to add more. I should just call it quits, but I think that's a good apple. Thank you all so much for drawing with me today. I hope that you learned something new and enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to let me know in the comment section below. And I hope that we can create together again soon.